Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Welcome for another episode of Fireside Chat with Sridhar Chityala ji and TV Mohandas Pai ji. Sridhar ji, Mohandas Pai ji, namaskar and welcome to
Namaskar,
PGurus channel.
namaskar, namaskar. Good to be here.
Good morning. Good to be here, Mohan.
Good to be here.
I almost feel like I'm becoming smarter by the minute in the company of you two distinguished gentlemen. Today, viewers, we are going to talk about the economic responses by the governments of the United States and India, the two largest democracies of the world, to a COVID situation. What were the things that were planned out? How did it play out? And looking forward, what do these two large economies need to do to get the growth back on where it was like at the end of 2019? To start with, I would like to go to Sridhar Chityala ji, where he can probably explain how US's approach to providing a stimulus for the economy post-COVID after March of 2020. Sridhar ji, please take it away.
Good. Thank you so much. I think it's a great question. It's a great context. If there's one thing which President Trump's administration stands out, it is the whole economic package that's been put together, which is about less taxes, and more kind of freedom to the businesses to stimulate the economy. And that has been the characteristic of the presidency of President Trump. Confronted with pandemic, one of the things that you have to do is you have to catch the economic cycle or economic decline ahead of the curve and then do the right amount of inducement and launch your programs. And the second thing is you have to also harmonize your monetary and fiscal policy. So on both fronts, I think Trump and the Fed have done an outstanding job. Right around March and April, the first thing that they did right is around putting $2.2 trillion of economic stimulus package, roughly translating to 10% of GDP. Highest ever done in the United States. When you contrast and compare the last two crises, namely the global financial crisis as well as the internet bubble, peak was around 2% and averaged around less than 1.5% for 3-4 years until it petered down. So one can say the recovery took much longer in that cycle relative to what you see already in the US. I think that's the first kind of variable. Then the second thing that they did is to make sure that the economic stimulus is directed at the sectors of the economy which are most disadvantaged and most affected, but at the same time builds confidence. So when you look at two areas, the consumer confidence as well as the business confidence, so the programs in terms of the tax benefits or the cash paybacks, cash checks that everybody got, helped the consumer confidence to kind of build up. The payouts, they calculated the amount to be equal to per capita of United States. So most of the people got checks equivalent to that. What happens to the unemployed? The unemployed benefit, besides the state programs, which also increased, they added another $500 from the Fed, from the federal budget. So both the individuals who are employed, who were unemployed during this period, and those who are already unemployed got cash stimulus checks for them to go and spend and not be worried about where the cash is coming from. Mind you, it is a payout. So in other words, it's not a loan. That's number one. Number two, what did they do to the two important sectors which roughly make up 50% of the economy, which is the consumer and SMEs and mid-corporate? So they came up with a $500 billion package which goes to mid-corporates. Then in two installments, 340 and about 240 billion, roughly about $540 billion was injected into the SME sector. And that was called as the PPP, or the Payroll Protection Program. Attached to this program, that's roughly equal to 3 months. I sympathize, Mr. Sri Iyer, you only got 2.5. But, when you get the next stimulus, it'll be normalized. But most people got, roughly 3 months. When you normalize it, when you look at the program itself also was structured around that employment is guaranteed for 90% of the people 2021, 2024, those who avail this program. So they not only got this 3 months paychecks, but there is almost guaranteed employment, which is not only to induce the business confidence, but also the consumer confidence. So all this resulted in two important kind of drivers, which we have seen in coming into quarter three. What are they? One, the consumer spend, which dipped, got back to the normalcy in the shortest time, which is 6 months. Whereas in the prior two crises, especially the last one, it took 16 months, and the prior one took 36 months, which is the internet crash. So even the consumer confidence numbers, you could see building up as a result of the stimulus reaching directly the beneficiaries, who are the critical players in the economy. And my final, and then I'll take a pass, is the unemployment, which is a very significant number. We dipped in 2 months to 6.87 million people technically called unemployed. And I think President Trump, when he went public, he said, treat it as furloughs, don't treat it as unemployed. This will resume back because the PPP program has an inducement. As we stepped into the end of the third quarter, we are back to less than 8%. The unemployment has come down to 667,000. So when you look at the stimulus, the drivers of the stimulus, and the economic package reaching the beneficiaries, the general level of confidence also was visible in the housing startups, which is another important parameter in US economy. So consumer confidence, business confidence, housing starts, liquidity in the system, and the 0% rates, which again Fed had said that they would preserve till end of 2021, which means that all the business and consumer drivers in conjunction with the economic policy helped United States. The unofficial numbers predicted for Q3 from a big dip in Q2 is, Goldman says is about 35%, but the average estimate is around 30% on the uplift in the Q3.
So to summarize what you just said, sir, America is truly experiencing a V-shaped recovery, and we are down to 660,000 odd unemployed. It was at 180,000 or thereabouts at the end of 2019. So there's still some way to go, but the signs are all there. There is enough money in the system. And just one thing I want to add to what you had said, Sridharji, that the average income of household income of America is, I think, around $52,000. So
yeah.
This is something that we need to keep in mind, because what we are going to now hear from is from Sri TV Mohandas Pai on how things are playing out in India. India had its own economic stimulus package. Perhaps Mohandas Pai ji, you can try and capture things on an apples to apples, maybe in dollars if possible. If not, I will try to do the conversion and I'll try to summarize it after you have done talking to what it translates to in dollars. It doesn't matter what the conversion rate is. What I want to provide to people is what is the percentage of help that is being given. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sri. Well, listening to Sridhar, only the United States can do what the United States did, because they can print their own notes. $2.5 trillion, I think $3.5 trillion of stimulus. The Fed will print the notes, give credit, and you can send money to everybody, put it in the bank account. It's been fabulous because, your interest rates are down. There's no borrowing cost. You can print almost unlimited money, and the world will lap it up, or the Fed will lap it up. Now, India, we don't have capital convertibility. We are only a $3 trillion economy. Our per capita income is just $2,000. In PPP, possibly is about $8,500. So we must remember that India is a poor country compared to the United States. We are not the same. Now, to understand what Modi did, we need to understand what are people doing. 43% of our population is in agriculture. 43%. I think the US is 3% or 1% or some very small number. 43%. We had a very, very good crop for the Rabi crop last year. That is, first quarter of this year, continuing to second quarter. It is a big harvest. So money was there. He made sure that even though India was locked down, the rural areas to free of lockdown. People could harvest. He made sure people, government bought up all the crops to the minimum support price, and farmers got the money. And then he made sure they got enough money and liquidity to start the next harvest. And today I'm happy to say that the monsoon is about 7% up compared to the same period this year. And all in the country, the distribution of monsoon has been very good. It's been possibly one of the best for the last 25, 30 years. And this year we got about 7% increase area under the crops. So we're going to have a record agriculture harvest, which has already started, even though farmers in Punjab are protesting. So when you look at this distribution of people, 43% in agriculture, 25% in industry and construction, and the balance 32% in services, you got to understand what he did. What Modi did was to create a stimulus of $260 billion. The $260 billion is close to 9% of GDP. 9% of GDP. Out of which $40 billion was income support or direct benefits, and the balance were loan guarantees or liquidity in the financial system. Now, why did he do that? He made sure that 60% of India's population who live on less than $2 a day were taken care of. What did he do? He sent some limited amount of money to 200 million women's bank account. 200 million women. He just did instantly. He paid 95 million farmers some 2,000 rupees into the bank account. It may seem a very small sum of money, but for them it was good. And then for about 85 million women, he gave them free gas for their cooking for about nearly 6 months. And then he made sure that free rations were given from March till November for about 800 million people in this country. Free ration. That means each one got 5 kgs of rice or wheat and 1 per month, and 1 kg of pulses. And these are sent free. So people will have money, people will have gas stove to cook, free of gas and free gas, and people will have a little bit of money to buy something else. So he made sure that these things were taken care of. Then he had a $40 billion loan guarantee scheme for the MSMEs because they were deeply hurt, out of which about 70% has already been sanctioned, and about, I think, 60% is on the verge of getting dispersed. So they all got liquidity, and because they all ran out of liquidity. Then he had a $25 billion of credit given to farmers to start the next cropping. Because, the crop came in March, April, and you had to start for the next monsoon before the rains came in. And that helped them create a bountiful harvest now, with the monsoon being very, very good. Then he had a $15 billion of farm gate investment. That is all across the farms. He's going to invest money to create infrastructure. And he made sure that fishermen got something, farmers got something, etc. And the Reserve Bank of India brought in nearly $120 billion of liquidity support by reducing the cash deposit ratio for the banks, by buying back the bonds and giving money to the banks to on-lend to create liquidity, so that industry will not have to shut down for want of liquidity because everything crashed down. Well, it did help, but in the first quarter of our financial year, July, August, September, our GDP came down by about 24%. The United States came down by 31.2%, $2.14 trillion. Am I right, Sridhar? And
Correct.
Sridhar has been having a Twitter fight with Geeta Gopinath of the IMF, who wrongly put the data. The decline in the US second quarter was only minus 9%, whereas minus 9% was the full year. The US suffered a big decline because you must remember, US and India were in a full lockdown, very big lockdown, everything locked down. And when you have a service sector, which is 85% of GDP in the United States, everything locked down means really people are hurt. Of course, they had a big stimulus, they gave money, etc. We do not give money to the middle class. 40% of the population, which is lower middle class got nothing. Yes, some of them were able to withdraw their savings, accumulate savings to the pension scheme, provident fund scheme, etc. But that was not too much. Many of them had salary cuts. Many of them lost jobs. They're living off the savings, and they're looking forward to a stimulus. And government said that if you give them money right now, where will they spend? They're at home. They're all at home. They're cooking at home, etc. So the stimulus came by, and the result of all this has been that in this quarter, that is July, August, September, July is better than June, August is better than September, and September has grown in auto sales more than 20% above September of last year. In electricity consumption, it's already gone up. In many other facets, manufacturing has gone up. Some of the services sector is still down because the restaurants are only now opening up. Airline industry is still working at 40%, and we are not seeing much of hospitality or others open up. So part of the services sector, which is 55% or something in India, is still hurt. And I think half of it is hurt, half of it is quite okay. So I think in second quarter, our GDP will be up by maybe about 18 to 20% compared to what it was declined. So overall decline could be 8 to 12%. Because remember, when you're 100, you come down by 24, you are at 76. On 76, if you grow 20-21%, that's just 15 or 16, you're still down. I'm sure Sridhar knows the math. So US could be down 9% for this quarter because you come down 31%, you're up 30. That is about, the 30 on 30 is about 20%, correct?
Yeah.
How much is that, Sridhar? 20%, correct?
Yeah.
So I think that will be good. So I think Modi has done reasonably well. Now waiting for a second stimulus. In terms of unemployment, at a time when everything was locked down, there were reportedly 126 million people unemployed, and that was something like about 22-23%. Now it's come down to 7 to 8%. It came down to 5.8%. Then again, it's gone to 7%. A normal unemployment in India is between 6.5 to 7.5, 8%. So it's come down to normal, even though there is great work in the rural areas. Now we had about 10 million people who are migrants to bigger cities go back, and Kejriwal in Delhi created a crisis by opening up the roads and road traffic and allowing the buses to go to them and made them walk back to the cities because from Delhi because they had no public transport and the railways are not working. Even the government started the railway system separately. Now, Sri, we have a problem in India like you have a problem in the United States, which is not there in most of the countries. We have a federal government in Delhi which can dictate policy. We have 29 state governments and some 7 or 8 union territories ruled by the center. Now, the state government don't listen to the federal government. They do what they want and they fight. So when Modi does something and asks them to do something, they don't do it. For example, the migrant crisis was caused by the Chief Minister of Delhi because he pushed everybody to come to the bus station saying the buses will be arranged, whereas buses could not be arranged. And there were a lot of people and it created a furor all over and forced many people to work. Then people went to Supreme Court to say the right to life is hurt, and Supreme Court said it is the duty of the state government to give people food and take care of them, not the union government. Not the union government. So politics has started in India blaming Modi for a very tough lockdown and for destroying the economy, whereas people don't compare India with Japan, which went down 28%, a very rich country, the United States, which went down 32%, 31.4%, India went down 24%. This is not to say things are different, but we have the same political problem that you have in America, where Trump gets blamed for everything, and the credit goes to everybody else who possibly create all this blame game just to put Trump in the bad light. So we have a very large left and the leftist media which is trying to blame Modi, even though it is not, even though Modi has done everything anybody could conceivably do. Now, let me give some data. We got 7 million people infected. We got 105,000 people dead. And our death rate is just 75 per million. In the whole of Europe, there are between 500 to 600 per million for many countries. Southeast Asia is lower. And even if you take the people infected, 7 million on 1.38 billion is a very, very small number. So the impact of the lockdown has been very good. And the economy is coming back. For example, the GST taxes in the month of September paid for August were nearly 10% up compared to the same month last year. And October, I'm sure, will be again 10% up because it is in September that we saw car sales go up, everything goes up. I'll use just one more point, Sri. And the point is, now September has been an extremely good month. October, November, December, we have the festival season. Some analysts are saying that car sales are gone up by 20% in September because everything is stocking. Yes, they're all stocking for the festival, it's true. Now we have to see after the festival in October, maybe beginning of November, whether the trend will continue till December. I do believe the trend could continue. We could see good growth and we could be on a flat GDP growth basis instead of a 9 to 12% decline in quarter 2 of our quarter, which is quarter 3 of your quarter. We could be flat and we could see growth coming back in January, February, March. So this is the status all over. And Modi has taken care of all the poor. And the last point again, Sri, Modi brought in a lot of reforms. He allowed farmers to go sell where they want, give them freedom. He liberalized defense. He liberalized many other industries. He redefined the MSMEs to make them bigger. He brought in some other reforms to make sure that all industrial labor reforms 44 laws were consolidated into 4 different courts. It got it passed to parliament. A lot of reforms have been stuck for 25, 30 years, were all cleared up by Prime Minister Modi ever since the lockdown. And today, we are a very, very different country with a lot of reforms compared to where we were before COVID.
Thank you, Mohandas Paji. Sridharji, before I come to you, I just want to touch upon a couple of things. Mohandas Paji, you said that from the workforce percentage, about 43 to 44% is in agriculture. Can you do a similar percentage breakdown on who is contributing to the GDP of India, sir? And I'll come to the same question for Sridharji also.
Well, let me say, in terms of GDP, it is 15% for agriculture, 15% only. So 43% of people make up 15% of GDP. Industry is again 25, that is 40, and the balance 60 is in services. India has a very high amount of services. Out of 16 services, 11 is government. Government has a very large impact on India too. So I think the contribution of agriculture to GDP is very low, and agriculture this year could grow between 3 to 5%. But even though there's growth, there's income going there, contribution to GDP is very less. It's in services, which is very high, and in half of services, which is basically got to do with retail and it's got to do with tourism, travel, everything, that is still down, and that is where the recovery has to come.
Thank you very much, TV Mohandas Paji. Sridharji, could you please break down the workforce of America, what sectors they are employed in, sir? Because the next question is going to be based on that.
Well, I think that the vast number of people are employed in the SME sector. That's close to about 50% of the people are employed in the SME sector. There are 32 million registered businesses in United States. Their average, when you say small business, the definition of a small business in United States is anything which has got a top line sales of 20 million US dollars. Average employees range from like 1 to 3 to on the top to about 200 people. The next sector, which does the employment, is the mid corporate sector, which is typically those which have 20 million to 500 billion. That roughly is around about another 20%. Then you have, that includes manufacturing and everything within that. Then you have the government employment. So broadly, it is classified into SME, mid to large corporates, and then you have the government. So these four segments constitute where the vast employment is. In terms of we need to understand what kind of drives the GDP of the United States. Consumer spending, that's the first and foremost important parameter of the US economy. What's the next one? Which is the business spending. That is the number 2. What's the number 3? Investments that happen both from the government as well as external. That's the 3rd. And of course, the 4th is the government spending. So these are the 4 components which drive the US economy.
Thank you, sir. And before I revert to Mohandas Paji, I just wanted to make one observation that a broad section of our audience are the ones who are feeling the pinch the most. And I must say that you touched upon this, Sridharji, about 32 million small businesses are there in the United States. And many of them, the owner or the person who runs the business does not pay himself or herself unless that business is turning a profit. So they basically are deferring, taking salaries, and they basically look at the profits to make themselves paid. And when the first round of SME stimulus, Philip, came, I pointed this out via tweets, and somebody somewhere listened, because a door slightly opened for smaller businesses where the income is only contingent on making profit. So there is a certain amount of recourse to help them also. Mohandas Paji,
I think you made a very important observation, because we need to see how that was treated from a US point of view. That first stimulus of $350 billion ran out very quickly.
Yes.
And there was a hue and cry that vast number of people were left out. And immediately the second stimulus of $48 billion was injected specifically to address that segment. And also, there's no exclusion whether you're an owner or an employee. Every person was entitled to take his or her salary for 3 months, and were part of the kind of the economic setup. I think that's the very important differentiating factor. Even in the second stimulus, the most affected industry and this particular SME sector is again the target of the focus as to whenever there is a consensus between the two parties. So they are very focused on the universe, which effectively is a direct contributor to an economic output.
Thank you, Sridharji. Mohandas Payavre, the thing I'm actually trying to ask you, or probably I'm trying to goad you towards that, is that in India, the middle class and the lower middle class, where they have budgeted expenditure. What I mean by that is paying students fees, saving for their education, perhaps going abroad, and so on and so forth. A lot of those things have basically been stopped or halted. How and they are basically drawing down on their savings. This is what you said, sir. How does Prime Minister Modi plan on replenishing back their savings? Because remember, India's GDP, one way to compute that is divide the percentage of savings by the efficiency of capital, and 30% divided by, I think, 4 or 5, 8.
Four.
So you see where I'm getting at, right?
Yeah.
So I'm specifically asking this because all the viewers will say that is great that the rural India is doing fine. It's great that my agricultural brother is doing fine. Right now, I have a problem that my savings have come down drastically. How is the government planning on helping me?
Well, Sri, I'll just give you a piece of data. India's GDP is driven 70% by consumption and 30% by investment. I think US it is 85-15, if I'm right, Sridhar.
Yeah.
85% consumption or more, and the balance is investment. So investment is just not there. Nobody's investing except government. Government is spending money on infrastructure, but the momentum has to still come. Now, Sri, you're very right. 40% of people have not got anything. Of course, some of them have got the ability to withdraw from their pension funds like the Provident Fund, and some of them in the lower level have got the ESI, Employee Social Security System, whereby employee state insurance, where they could draw some money, but very small amount of money. People in the construction industry, labor class, were given some money, but 5,000 rupees or 4,000 rupees, that is very, very small. So most people in the lower middle class and middle class who are wage earners, and we have about 100 million people in the wage earning class who get social security, out of which about 25 million are in government. They didn't get anything. Government servants are getting the salary, except their increase due to inflation. They're not getting that what is called the DNS allowance. They're not getting it for this year. Thankfully, Modi is cut it down because their jobs are assured. Now, for the balance 75 million people who are on payroll, well, they've only got something because they could draw from the savings. So they're deeply hurt. In the middle classes, barring the big institution, many of them had to take a salary cut, very deep cut. Some of them lost their jobs. Young people have been laid off, and they are very unhappy because they have not got any relief. Now the government is saying we're going to come with a relief. And my view is the only relief government can give them is to reduce income taxes because, there are 80 million people who file returns, 80 million people. The MSMEs file returns of 22 million. And the balance about another 35-40 million file through salaries, 50 million file salaries, etc. And I think if we give them, reduce the taxes for salaries instantaneously, what is withheld from the salary will be money in the bank. Of course, what the government did is they reduced the withholding tax for interest, for dividends, everything else. That's because the corporate taxes were reduced from about 35% to about 25%. But for salaries, the withholding remains the same. So I think there's an asymmetry of benefits that has happened in this country. And I think it's time that government looked at it, and people are very unhappy and upset because they've not got any benefits because, the Prime Minister Modi has not addressed them. Hopefully they will address them in this. Of course, the people who have got MSMEs, they got loan guarantees, and the loan guarantees are 20% of the bank loans that they had at the time of in the lockdown happened in the month of March. And that loan is guaranteed. And I think a large number have got it, but that is something they have to pay over 4 years at maybe a lower rate of interest than what the banks were giving them.
Thank you, Mohandas ji. Before I come to the next question to Sridhar ji, I just wanted to tell our viewers we are about halfway into our program. This has been a very absorbing discussion thus far, and I'd like to take this thing forward. Viewers, with your indulgence, today I would like to not take more than 2 or 3 questions maximum, because that way we listen to industry experts. They give their opinion on what has been happening in these two largest democracies. Sridhar ji, the question to you is, sir, Mohandas Pai referred to how some states were working at cross purposes with the central government, and we saw the same thing in the United States also. Now, in the case of in the case of India, what Modi said was state governments who are running shortfalls for paying salaries and other expenditures, you need to borrow directly from the RBI. In other words, the central said, no, we are not going to handhold you on this one. You have a GST income shortfall. You go and make your deal with RBI. Perhaps this is the way he's trying to tell them, you have your own country to run. You have your own state to run, and you are fiscally responsible for the health of that state. So, Sridharji, how is Trump tackling this part?
See, I think one of the amazing differences between United States and India is as follows. Most of the programs that is determined at the Fed or at the federal level, be it the business investments, be it the business loan PPP programs, be it the consumer payment checks, etc., make sure that it addresses consistently without any state intervention across the country. So therefore, from a federal deployment of the benefits is concerned, it's consistent and it's the same. States are not involved. Okay, where states are involved is states gives more targeted benefits by virtue of from their own specific balance sheets to small business assistance, unemployment insurance, local government, then for hospitals and other kinds of programs that they support. And there is a well-oiled program in terms of the financial and budget management is concerned, the states to go and borrow in the market and fund their programs. It's less contentious in United States, especially around the whole budget management. Where the real problem comes in is around the enforcement of consistent and common health care and programs of such. That goes into state and we really get into problems.
Mohandas Paji, would you like to add to what I added,
Yeah.
what I said, please?
Yeah. But Sri, what did the government do for the states? The government of India gets its revenues from GST, which is collected and given to the states 50-50. It gets its revenue from excise duties, and it gets its revenue from corporate tax, income tax, and from import duties, which is called custom duty. Now, custom duty goes to the center. For GST, they have got a formula where they're supposed to give 14% tax increase year on year for 5 years. So they are stuck because everybody's income has come down. GST revenues are very down, and I'll tell you the story about the states. Now, in terms of excise duties, they raise the taxes on fuel massively, so that is going up, and income tax and corporate taxes are down. So for the 5-month period, Government of India's tax collection as against the budget is down 25%. Now the states are getting money from the GST because they gave the power for the GST to a common pool. They get from state excise duties, which are on liquor, and much of the time liquor shops were shut because large part. They get their money from fuel charges, and the whole shutdown impacted that too. So even the states have lost their own income by about 25%. So government told them, we'll increase your borrowing power to about 4.5 or 5% of GDP, so you can go borrow money, and they've been borrowing money. But what the government of India did very interestingly, they said, based on the budget, we are supposed to send you so much of money every month. We'll keep sending it even though our taxes are down. So even though the taxes were down 25%, what the states got was according to the budget. Now, that is excluding GST. Now in GST, when the states and centers signed a deal about 3.5 years ago, the agreement was the state will make sure that they get a 14% increase every single year based upon a prior year. Now this year, that 14% is not there. The tax itself is not going up. So there is a very big deficit of something like about maybe $30 billion. $30 billion. It may look very small to you in the US, but it's a big thing here. And what the government of India is telling them is, why don't you borrow money? Part of it, the interest and the cost of borrowing will be paid out of a cess. So on about 25 items under GST, there is a cess. And the cess is used to compensate them for the shortfall between what they earn and the 14%. And then they said for the balance money, which, because of the shortfall in the tax collection, why don't you borrow money yourself? Interest you have to pay, and the principal will be paid out of the cess. Now they're negotiating, but the government of India said very clearly, whatever is the constitutional agreement and guarantees we are given, we will stand by it. But they're saying we can't borrow, but you borrow, and we will guarantee that. And they extended the cess collection, which is supposed to end on 2022, to an open-ended thing to say, you borrow against the cess, and we will make sure the money is repaid back outside the cess. And whatever you borrow will not be counted as your borrowing, because it will be outside some limits, because each state has got a limit after which they can borrow, which is 25% of GDP. So that's become a political fight. But the government of India said very clearly that we are going to make sure whatever promises we do will be honored. But how it is going to be honored is what they're negotiating. They got a meeting tomorrow on Monday, because they had a meeting on the 5th. It didn't work. They got a meeting. And of course, the opposition states are playing politics. And sadly, the finance minister didn't make it explicitly clear that they will guarantee that they will make the payment. They should use a term called act of God, and suddenly it became a very big political issue. She was being honest and saying pandemic is an act of God. It's not something beyond our control. So our revenues are not going to come from GST. Your revenues are not to come. We both have to live with it and adjust. Whereas the opposition state saying, no, you gave a guarantee, pandemic and no pandemic, act of God and no act of God, you still have to hold it up. And now they agreed, so they'll work it through. So we have this kind of politics because we are a federated structure like the United States. But like Sridhar said, your structure is very different from our structure. And the government of India gives 42% of its taxes, most of its taxes, to the center under a finance commission, which is set up every 5 years under the Constitution.
Yeah. So only one point to add to. Thanks, Mohan, for that. One point. I think we discussed this in one of our daily shows. The basic, the politics, just to put the politics in between the state and the federal here is, many of these states which are, to be politically correct by opposition, some of the opposition are non-Republican or Democratic ruled states. They feel that the second stimulus, the contention is that a lot of money has been packed into that, basically to bail out these states which have borrowed disproportionate to their balance sheet. So, which is why Trump is opposing, and there's a gap of close to $600 billion between the stimulus package of the House and the stimulus package of the Trump administration. It's converged a little bit, but that's the element of close to the politics of what you're alluding to in terms of, states resisting and asking for more kind of flesh.
Thank you, Sridhar ji. I just want to set the context a little differently now. I'm just looking at the COVID and the effects of COVID. A recently released report from the National Health Service of United Kingdom had some very interesting findings. They found that amongst the younger generation, deaths were only 31 for those who were healthy prior to contacting it. That means somebody is healthy and they contacted COVID and they died because of that. The number is 31. In the entire population of United Kingdom, the number was 371. That's it, guys. 371. Where the other thousands are buried are those who are probably having some other condition that perhaps got exacerbated. Now, having said all this stuff, in your opinion, Sridhar ji, since you already answered the last one, I'm going to go to Mohandas Payeware. In your opinion, sir, is the worst over as far as COVID is concerned? And do you think that now India is poised for, whether it is a V shape or a W shape, whatever shape, is it poised for a recovery?
Sridhar, Sri, it's very difficult to tell right now because India's per day infection went up to about 95,000 per day. But remember, it's on 1.38 billion people. Our death is only 75 per million population. The United States, I think, is much, much higher. And all other countries in Europe are much, much higher. Yeah, 657. United States is much higher. Our death rate is very low. Our death rate is now come to, I think, 1.6% or so, which should come down. And remember, 27,000 people die in India every day on a normal basis, whereas the COVID deaths are only about 1,000 or 950. And for the last 10 days, the infection has been hovering around 70,000 to about 79,000. So it's come down from 95,000. And today, the recovery cases are something like about 86%. That means 86% of 7 million people are recovered. And every day, the total quantum of cases is coming down on an absolute basis. Now, have we come to the second wave? We don't know. I mean, Kerala seems to have come to the second wave because suddenly, from a state which they said it conquered COVID, they did very well, and the left press went to the moon and spoke about what a great minister they had and everything, then they're very good, they got some award. They're now having nearly 11,000 cases per day. 11,000 cases, I think yesterday, higher than Karnataka. Maharashtra, which has got the largest number of cases, is plateauing. I think it's coming down. Delhi has plateaued. Suddenly they're seeing an increase because winter has set in Delhi. So in Punjab, in Punjab is got a higher death rate. UP has done remarkably well, but it's a very big state. We don't know what is happening much. So whatever information is coming, Bihar is going to have an election next month, and the cases are just stabilizing. West Bengal, which is ruled by an opposition party, nobody knows what is happening here because the lady refused to give any data. So we got all these kind of things. But I think the good news is, Sri, people are learning to live with it. People are going out. Traffic is coming back. And like you said, the death rate is not so high. And people are saying, look, we've got to earn a living. We'll take the risk. And the death rate being so low in India, people are willing to take a risk because they have to live. And I think you'll be very surprised that in Dharavi, the deaths were very less. Dharavi has got some 800,000 people, the highest density of people per square kilometer in the world. Their deaths were very less. And they found that a lot of people have got immunity. The immunity of the Indian people is much higher than the United States. I'm sure you know that because, we are a very different country. We live very naturally with all kinds of diseases. We're getting immune to that. And the death rate is more for senior people who are comorbidity and not for the younger people. Even the younger people are getting infected. The data has come out. I don't remember the data exactly, but this is like this. So India is flattening out. We got to see next 2-3 months what is going to happen. We don't know whether second wave, third wave. We're seeing in Europe a second wave come up. France is worried. Oman in the Middle East is worried. We're seeing Spain getting worried. I read that Madrid is under lockdown right now, and Oman wants to have a curfew or something like that. We don't know, but we will live with it. It's no longer such a worry. And as for recovery, we are seeing the beginnings of a V-shaped recovery right now because September has been extremely good, much more than September of last year. And October is expected very good, much more than October of last year. But the key is, will it continue beyond December? The hope is it will. It's too early to say.
Sridharji, over to you.
Well, I think that we have demonstrated already we are in the middle of a V-shaped recovery in the United States. I laid out the principles that given the fiscal stimulus and a very integrated fiscal and monetary policy and the low interest rate regime and very targeted programs, we already will see the uptick in when the numbers are reported for Q3. We believe that we will finish 2020 somewhere between 5.6% to 6.2% negative GDP, and we'll be around 19.47 trillion. Then we'll probably see about 3%, 3 to 3.5% next year, and then maybe another 3 to 3.5%. So in 2022, we will be back or exceed where we were in 2019. So therefore, I think the programs have worked. The general sentiments are high. Even the stock market, S&P is back to around 3.4% plus. Dow Jones as well as the NASDAQ are almost on even level. So the market sentiments are very positive and very high. On the earnings side, on the Q2, most of the companies which reported earnings, reporting a PE of 25 on an average on the S&P index. So therefore, there's no data which says that there's anything that points out to an imminent disaster. On the confidence index, around those 9 parameters, everybody seemed to be confident except for the sentiment around the personal investments. So therefore, I think that the program has been well managed, and both Republicans and Democrats will do stimulus, and that the market has already factored in. That's number one. Number two, for the first time in a history, you have a Fed governor who is saying, borrow more, borrow more. The pandemic warrants borrow more. You cannot lift. We use the word. Don't lift the leg. Push the pedal. That's the sentiment. And it will not impact the economy. This is not contrarian to fiscal indiscipline. Okay, more taxes is fiscal indiscipline. You don't add more taxes now. You have to cut less. You have to cut taxes. And if I have to speak for President Trump, $1.7 trillion of further tax cuts awaited under the Trump formula. So therefore, when you look at the parameters and the general market drivers and indicators, I think we are in very good spot.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
Sri, I love the Americans because they develop a new theory called modern monetary theory, which as per whatever a rate says, that keep the interest rates down and borrow money and cut your taxes. So there'll be growth. And if the debt goes up to 150%, 200% of GDP, it is fine for a simple reason. Interest rate is so very low. The cost of the money is so low, it will wear itself down the system. Now in India, we have a problem. The average cost of the debt, accumulated debt of the government of India is 7% plus. And 25% the revenues of the government of India goes to pay the interest. Similarly for the state. So we have a problem about prior debt. Second, the debt that is borrowed this year is at 5.8%. 5.8%. All right. You're borrowing at maybe 0.8%, 5.8%. So the consensus in India is borrow what is needed, don't over borrow. But the government of India has said we will do all that is required to make sure that the economy works very well. So we have to wait. And right now the government has said, whatever we told you we'll borrow, we will borrow. Whereas the Reserve Bank of India governor has said they're going to have an easy monetary policy, they're going to have liquidity, they'll support the government for the borrowing, but the government is not increasing the borrowing, which could be maybe 10 to 12% of GDP this year between the states and the union government, and we'll keep it at that. The bond rates went up to 6.15 because the bond market is very upset because they thought the government is going to borrow more money. The government came around and said, no, we're not going to borrow money. We're going to stick to a limit. So we got to still see what it is. And remember, we don't have a convert currency. We don't have other countries in the world buying our currency and pressing it around. And our Federal Reserve, like your Federal Reserve, the Reserve Bank of India has got a balance sheet of something like $750 billion. It's gone up because we got $540 billion of foreign currency reserves today, which has shot up by $60 billion compared to the beginning of the year.
Mohandas Paiji, you mentioned one number that I'm curious to know a little bit more about. You said that about 28% of the government income is going towards servicing interest. How much of that is to its own public sector owned banks?
Well, I think, if we look at the government debt, the government, center government and state government has got a debt of about 80% of GDP. Center and the state, 80% of GDP on $3 trillion is $2.4 trillion, or which only $100 million is the debt owed to foreigners. Okay, only $100 billion of government debt. All right, the total debt owned by India to foreigners is $550 billion, and we nearly have enough for reserves. So I think if you look at the debt owned by the banks have got about 32% of nearly about $1.8 trillion as government securities. 32% of $1.8 trillion is something like about $500 billion, Sridhar?
Yeah.
It would be from $600 billion.
Yeah.
$600 billion. So out of this government debt of 80% of GDP, $2.4 trillion, about $600 billion the banks, then the insurance companies have got something, then the provident fund, the savings have got something. So I think the banks sold a lot of the securities issued by the center and the state.
I have a question that is going to be slightly different from all these things because I'm looking forward now. You want to add something, Sridharji? Because I have one last question for both of you. It's an important question that will probably take some time for both of you to answer that. But if you want to add something now, please go ahead, sir.
No, I just wanted to add two important points which is very important for people to understand. The 10-year US Treasury is at 0.7%. A 30-year US Treasury is at 1.5%. It went up from since about 1.4 to about 1.5%. India is paying 7.1% on a bond. Okay, they have a problem. Okay, so the bond vigilantes in India are effectively driving and controlling the market. That's number one. So what United States has done is rebalanced its debt. When it rebalanced the debt, the interest cost as a percentage of GDP has come down from 3.2 to 1.2. So there are two things that are needed. One, more external borrowing is needed for India, as well as they really have to look at whether they can afford to pay this type of interest rate given the markets. I think those were my 2 points.
Yeah, but Sri, I'll just add a point. A problem in India about the debt has been we have had high inflation in the past, not like the United States because of supply side issues. And the second thing is, we don't have the middle class and the seniors in this country go to the bond market because they don't have a bond market like you have. And the equity, they're very scared. So most of the money savings for the senior people above 55 are in deposits of banks. So the banks have to give certain amount of money for them to keep a living. And if the fixed income gets destroyed, they will be devastated. Now, Sridhar is very happy as a capitalist because he's a big capitalist and he's got most of his money in equities because, he's got maybe a pension which is paid, which is on defined benefit, not defined contribution maybe. He's very happy. But please remember what happens to fixed income. What happened to all the pension funds where 65% of the allocation was to fixed income before this market went up because equities have got risk. If the interest rates come down because G-Secs in America for 10 years on only 0.85%, the yields are going to come down. The yields coming down, the stock market PE has gone up. Now, yes, even the Indian PE has gone up because our yields are down, but yields are not down so much. So in India, you've got to balance between savers who live off the interest and the government which has to borrow and the kitty is limited. So what Sridhar says is very correct. Government of India has to go borrow outside at a time when interest rates are so low and borrow cheap so that interest rates in India will come down. All this bond mafia in India will not demand a higher price because the government can go borrow money. But we got very leftist sentiments here. The left doesn't want government of India to borrow, neither the right wants. The right, the people who are traditional people, conservative, they say, we don't want to go borrow outside, don't borrow outside, etc. So we are urging the government to ask parastatals to borrow. That is, Indian banks can go borrow more money because they got enough reserves, and our public sector can go borrow more money because if more money comes from outside. But the problem is that more money coming from outside is the absorption capacity of our country is very less. That's why we see RBI reserves go up by nearly $60 billion in the last 1 year, Sridhar, because RBI has now got $545 billion of reserves. So if dollars come in, it is not invested. People don't borrow money because the investment capacity is limited. It goes as liquidity in the banks and it goes back to Reserve Bank of India deposits because the banks keep the money back there and Reserve Bank of India's foreign reserves go up and they use the foreign reserve to go buy a US bond at 0.85%. So we're subsidizing Sridhar.
Thank you very much. Sridharji, 1 second.
We'll have a separate discussion on this topic.
Yes, that was my suggestion. That was my suggestion because the next question is an important one. I'm sorry, viewers, I do not have time for questions because we have only 7 to 8 minutes left, and this is 3 minutes to each of you gentlemen. Sridharji, there's a real chance that India might go to war. It could be with China, or it could be with a combination of China and Pakistan. This is a real scenario, according to the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. In that event, how do you see India's economy? Is that going to hurt the economy badly? Or sometimes war economy helps too, because the whole country starts moving in one direction. Everybody sets their differences aside and starts saying, we need to first protect our motherland. What do you see about this, sir?
Well, I think it's a great question. So this is where, myself and few people have had debates. India has done 3 things right. Okay. One, it has built a formidable infrastructure to combat any misadventures from its neighbors. It has assembled a global partners and alliances. And Mike Pompeo made a very profound statement when he left Japan after the Quad, which is to say that huge forces have assembled on the northern border, and United States must do everything to protect and be with India. So therefore, they have done that part. The second is, whenever you have a war, you need to have the capacity for any economic disruption and the ability to last the war. This is the exact purpose of that $550 billion reserves. You have $100 billion reserve, you cannot last a 2 months war. It's about 90 days supply. With a $550 billion, India can sustain a 12, 18, 19 months war using the reserves to augment from an economic support. So it has got the third. Yes, there will be economic consequences. Yes, there will be disruption. But given India is no longer a 500 billion economy, it is now a $3 trillion, $3.2 trillion economy. And it has got investments flowing in, and it has a base industry. It will recover. It may not be V, but it may be a L-type recovery. It will recover in the event of a war.
Mohandas Paiji, your thoughts?
Yeah, Sri, I don't think there's going to be a chance of war, very, very dim, for a very important reason. Our northern neighbor, China, is trying to nibble at a border and take over. The Indian army has pushed them back. It is standing firm. And Prime Minister Modi has told the army, defend the country. They're going to defend this country. The troops there are excellent mountain warfare fighters. They are a very war-seasoned people who have been fighting insurgents there. They've been there all the time. China's army is a one-child army. Remember, the one-child policy took place in 1978. All the troops below the age of 40 are all belonging to one-child families. China has not seen a war. They are not battle-hardened. They are not capable of doing that. And that is one. Of course, we will not underestimate them. That is point number one. We are fully prepared. We have built infrastructure. We got foreign currency reserve, like Sridhar says. Why do we foreign currency reserve? Only for importing oil or importing any equipment. Now, we have a tie with the United States. We have a tie with Europe, etc. So they're not going to shut us off. We are going to get arms. We are going to get aircraft. We are going to get what we want. And we can afford to pay for it. Even the oil that we want. Saudi Arabia and India are very, very strong. The Middle East and India are very, very strong. They have become a deep friend. The honored Prime Minister Modi, by giving him his highest thing. They're going to work with India. So oil supplies will be there. We can afford to pay. That's one. Second thing is, think about it. If China goes to war with India, what will be China standing around the world? Which country will trust China in future? China has got a problem in the South China Sea. The Americans have sent their aircraft carriers there. They got a problem with Taiwan. The Americans are going to be there. They got a problem with Hong Kong. Now they got a problem with their own Uyghurs and others in the east of the property. Now they got a problem on the border with India. Do you think any country in Southeast Asia, anywhere else, is going to trust China? The damage to China by this misadventure is going to be so high that China will not recover, because nobody will trust the hegemony power. You'll trust a democracy, not a totalitarian government. All the countries in Southeast Asia will be thinking, China, what is China going to do to them? And the United States has made it very clear that they are going to defend the right of every country to freely go in the seas. They're going to defend international law. They're going to come to the rescue of the Quad, and the Quad has come into being. And Japan also is beefing up, because Japan also gets threatened by China. So I don't think China will go to war. It will be an unmitigated disaster for them, especially when they're seeing lower growth and many things. But if any war comes, anything, India will defend. The country will be one. We will all go fight. And let me assure you, I'll be one of the first to offer my services to my government and my country. And like that, every Indian will rise to this flag. Let there be no doubt.
Thank you very much, Mohandas Paji. This is 1 minute summary from both sides. China's pain is India's gain. How do you see that? 1 minute answer, and then I'll go to the same question to Mohandas Paji. This will be the last question for this debate.
China's pain is India's gain is already translated into specific outcomes. Investment flows are now around 75 billion, number one. Manufacturing is progressively shifting, number two. India today, the partnership between India, United States, and several other EU members on a number of strategic technology as well as other matters has evolved. So clearly the landscape has shifted quite dramatically, right, under the present scenario. So I see India being, it's an opportunity for India to lose. It's not an opportunity for India to be deprived of.
Thank you very much, Sridhar.
Go
ahead. Please go ahead.
Yeah. India has seen investment come into India, not so fast because India is far away from China. Vietnam has seen the most because they got 1,200 kilometers border with the China, and most investment are Chinese companies shifting because America's others are putting pressure to diversify supply chain. Japan has got a $2 billion budget to shift their companies away, and they say that subsidized companies going to Bangladesh and India. So Japan will be there. We're seeing companies come, not so great, but India has become the investment hub for the digital monopolies of the United States. So all the Google, the Facebook, the Apples are coming here. Apple is set up manufacturing here. 3 of the world's largest contract manufacturing electronics already set up shop here. And Apple will sell maybe 10 million phones this season. Because, I was told by people that Apple stores are out of stock in this country. So, everybody seems to be buying Apple. So we are going to see an investment boom in India in the near future. We are very confident that we'll grow to about $5 trillion GDP from $3 trillion by 2026. This is going to be a break year, and $10 trillion by 2031. So India is well positioned. The country is united to face any foreigner who's trying to, come here and do some ungli to us in the border. And India will be united. We got foreign currency reserves. We got a manufacturing capacity which is underutilized. We can manufacture. We got enough battle-hardened troops. The army's morale is very high. We have built infrastructure. We are stocked up. We are ready. But I don't think China is going to do it. But we will certainly grow in the next 10 years.
Wow. What a conversation we had. And gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm sure the viewers got more than what they bargained for in this 1 hour of back and forth, where a lot of ideas about how economies should work, how large countries need to grapple with their own problems was discussed. And once again, my humble thanks to both of you gentlemen for taking time out of your busy schedules to come participate on this hangout. Viewers, we want to make fireside chats like this the best program about anything under the sun, about India, the US, or the West. And I would like you all to help us out by subscribing to our channel. And also, if you could donate to our channel, that would be very good, because it would keep our resources up. We can bring you even better quality programming. And once again, thank you very much, Mohandas Paiji and Sridhar Chityala ji. And as always, viewers will be back for the 15-minute news capsules every day of the week, starting tomorrow morning, 5:30 p.m. IST. Do tune in. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you. Thank you, Sri. Thank you, Sri.
Thank you. Thanks, Mohan. Yeah, it's good.